Olasunkanmi, Ojowuro, Director Transport Operatives, but the representatives is here, and Engineer Olasunkanmi will be taking it. So please, a round of applause for Engineer Olasunkanmi Ojowuro. A round of applause. You are not clapping. You are not clapping. Thank you very much. You're welcome, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody, especially the CEOs present here, the heads of agencies, directors, ladies and gentlemen. I am representing the Honorable Commissioner Minister from Transportation, Mr. Olasunkanmi. Is unavoidably absent, and he sends his apologies, and he also directed me to present his paper. Please, can you go to the slides? Okay, thank you very much. His slide is themed State-Level Transport Alignment, Integrating Alternative Energy into Lagos Mobility Systems. Of course, we know that transportation is a great emitter of pollution into the atmosphere, into the environment. Hence, it's very key that transportation play a key role in this formulation of policy for AFZ and the implementation in Lagos State. What is the role of alternative energy in public transportation? Transportation is about movement of goods, services, people from one point to the other by means of a vehicle. And this vehicle must be powered somehow, maybe by fossil fuel or alternative means. And when we have alternative means of energy for fueling vehicles, the environment benefits from it. All of us benefits from it. There's less carbon emission, there's less noise, and also public health, reduction in cardiovascular diseases. And that is one major role for considering alternative energy in public transportation. What is the economic and strategic case for alternative energy? One, decarbonization. It's very important. And that decarbonization process should be scalable. That is, taken in phases. With EV-based public transport, it helps the government to meet up with climate change requirements and sustainability targets. And of course, we are able to decarbonize urban mobility. Smart integration or smart technology. Alternative energy also synchronizes with route optimization, fleet monitoring, and energy management. And of course, we know that it is always capital intensive initially when we're procuring EV vehicles or infrastructure for charging, but over time, the cost of maintenance reduces. So over time, we have lower running costs. Lagos State government initiatives for cleaner transport. We have an agency, LAMATA, Lagos Area Metropolitan Transport Authority, and we have heard of the Blue Rail, which stretches from Marina to Maitu and is expected to, get to Okoko, and it is solely based on the use of electric system. Apart from that, LAMATA is implementing other schemes for electric buses under the Sustainable Urban Transport Agenda. And there are 2 buses in the fleet of Lamata now that is ongoing proof of concept, and that is done in partnership with Oando. EV integration into formal transport policy. In May 29, 2024, the transport policy was launched, and a key element of that policy has to do with EV adoption. And the focus is on encouraging low emission vehicles as part of the sustainability goals of this administration. And just as the previous speaker had said, the government cannot do it alone. We need private investors to acquire the infrastructure and also to provide charging infrastructure. And of course, the importance of PPP, public-private partnership, cannot be overemphasized. What is the CNG rollout strategy and infrastructure? For Lagos State, we have adopted a phased fleet deployment model, and that is under Lamata. Batches of CNG buses have been received and have been deployed to the presidential initiative on CNG. Then for freight and logistics, sometimes in, I think, was it December last year, 2025, the state government in partnership with one of the big banks in Nigeria are providing about 2,000 numbers of high capacity vehicles, specifically articulated vehicles. And this is meant for refleeting. And we're doing that in conjunction with NATO, which is a transport operator in Nigeria. The state is guaranteeing the transaction in providing 2,000 articulated trucks to be refleeted into what we have as freight and logistics in the state. CNG infrastructure expansion commenced some time ago. The target is that we'll be having 17 planned filling stations, CNG filling stations. Already we have about 6, and they are spread all over Lagos, Agege, Ogudu, and we're still constructing others at Oshodi, Ojota, Ikorodu, Aja. Our target is we're trying to ensure that the Ibile, the 5 divisions of Lagos are eventually covered, and to also make that seamless. Ibile Oil and Gas has been at the forefront of converting vehicles from fossil fuel to that of CNG. Policy and strategic framework. The alternative fuel vehicles policy aligns with Mr. Governor's Teams Plus agenda. Not only the Teams Plus agenda, we have the Lagos State Development Plan 2052 and the Energy Transition Plan. And other things that we have in place, like the rail and multimodal transport, has helped in moving travelers from one point of the other to the other, in large numbers, and that has reduced drastically the use of private cars on some of these corridors. For example, a lot of travelers who stay around Maitu, Ojo area now commute to the island on the Blue Rail, which is powered by electricity. And of course, we have the Red Rail that comes from Agbado to Yaba, and this automatically has reduced vehicles on the road on those corridors, and of course we have the environmental benefits. Water transport has also been a focus of Mr. Governor, and sometimes ago about 40 new ferries driven by electricity have been acquired. And if you have heard of the Omeko plan, all the ferries, about 75 in number, that will be coming to the state in that partnership, will be driven by, it will be EV driven. And that goes to show that the state is very deliberate and intentional in ensuring that the policy direction and frameworks would enhance alternative fuel, use in vehicles used in the state. What about technology and data systems? For most of these transportation modes that we have mentioned, the payment is done cashless. It's by the cowrie card, and with that, we're able to capture data. We're able to plan our routes effectively. We're able to deploy appropriately all this infrastructure for movement. What is the modern readiness and impact matrix? If you look at the slide, you see that for the regulated, which is managed by Lamata, it is very, very high, the impact and the readiness, because there is the capacity for charging. For the Danfo, the readiness is low because in this our climb, we have a lot of transport, how do I put it? A lot of transporters who do not have the necessary funds, skills. They just buy their vehicle and put it on the road. It's not easy for the ministry to coordinate such ones, and that is why we have come up with a policy that the ministry will not register any individual who buys a bus and puts it on the road for transport business. We are embarking on a program with Lamata, and it's called the Bus Reform Initiative. And what we're doing is that we are merging them into clusters. That is, you must have a minimum of about 50 vehicles in your fleet before you can be registered, and you must have a yard. We call it stabling yard. And that stabling yard is where your vehicles will retire after work during the day. And those stabling yards can be used as infrastructure for charging. And that is one of the issues we have with Danfo minibuses. That is why the readiness is low, and so on and so forth. We can see for the rail, the blue and red is high. These are, the regulated, mode of transportation that the state is managing. But for those of the informal sector, we still have some little, barrier. Like for the water ferries, there are a lot of players there. The readiness is medium and is due to low modal share and early tech readiness. Vehicle fleet transition development. I said earlier that Lamata has acquired buses, EV buses, and is going through proof of concept. And in a short while, there'll be need after the proof of concept to, acquire more of such buses. And for the Omeko that I mentioned earlier, charging stations will be built with the terminals. About 25 terminals will be built, at different parts of the state. It means that we'll be having 25 charging stations at these different terminals. And there is a multi-fuel transition context. The Lagos State Transport Energy Strategy, frames electrification alongside CNG alongside other alternative fuels. That is, we are not looking at CNG alone. We are looking at, hybrid form of energy. What are the opportunities for EV infrastructure integration? The most important factor here that the previous speaker had mentioned is policy alignment. Electric vehicle charging can be embedded within BRT corridors, bus terminals, ferry terminals, and rail adjacent hubs without needing entirely new frameworks. Lagos State transport policy already prioritizes climate-friendly, integrated, multimodal transport. That is to say that since the policy has focused on integrated multimodal transport, driven by climate-friendly energy, the state should be, intentional and deliberate about, ensuring that that policy works. And as I said earlier, the government cannot do it alone. There is potential for public-private partnership. Lagos is very dense, so we're looking at commercial centers, shopping complex, malls. They also can integrate, into the provision of charging infrastructure in the state. Also, deployment can be paired. That is, we're talking about hybrid, EV with CNG and other initiatives. Economic development, when we expand the EV infrastructure, of course, we know that jobs will be created, and of course, we know there'll be capacity building. And since Lagos State is the economic hub of Nigeria, Lagos State is well positioned to champion this. Challenges to EV integration. Of course, we had pushbacks, and some of these pushbacks has to do with supply of electricity via the grid. It is a major barrier. Then there is high capital and operating cost. Then we have limited capacity of experts, technicians that are needed in that mix. Then the policy and regulatory fragmentation. Now, this forum is very apt, and we have to really thank the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources for this collaboration so that there won't be fragmentation in the implementation of policies, affecting EV integration in the state. And as I said earlier, the informal transport system is very tasking for the ministry to manage those in the informal sector, because they are just individuals who are just players in that sector. However, we're trying to bring them together as entities, as companies, for ease of operation and for ease of regulation and management. What other opportunities and challenges are posed by transport mode? Of course, we see that of BRT and regulated buses. The opportunities there, the challenges. For all the, different strata of players in that sector, we can see the opportunities and the challenges. Policy and operational alignment for large-scale development. When those barriers that we have seen earlier must have been, tackled, then we can look at electricity supply, that is linking EV infrastructure to transport energy planning, that is, synchronizing, what the Ministry of Transportation has in its strategic transport master plan with what the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, has in place. Then we talk about capital costs. The public funding should be targeted towards a provision of mass transit electrification and public-private, partnership for depots, concessional finance, and others, etc., etc. And the informal transport, we should, as a government, as a state, as a ministry, formalize their activities. By the time we formalize their operations, then charging infrastructure can also work and be focused on their own operations too. Of course, there are gaps, And there is need to close this gap in terms of the policy. The first on the list here is policy and regulatory gaps. That is, there should be clear state-level EV infrastructure provisions for depots, terminals, and interchanges. Secondly, there should be alignment of transport electrification with Lagos sustainable urban mobility objectives. I mentioned the strategic transport mobility master plan, which is an important document that can be used in developing policy and regulatory gaps with the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. Also, policy certainty to reduce investor risk as state-controlled transport assets. That is being deliberate, being intentional on the part of the state. The last one under the policy and regulatory gaps is standardized planning approvals for EV-related installations in transport facilities. Of course, that is what is on the table for all of us to ensure that we implement now. Then infrastructure equity. There's need to prioritize public transport electrification over private cars so that benefits reach high volume and low income users. Oftentimes, the infrastructure that we have for EV now are clustered around Ikeja, Victoria Land, Ikoyi, and maybe Lekki. What about Badagry? What about Ojo? What about some places far in Ekpe? So we need to ensure that there is even electrification of, even EV electrification so that low-income earners can also benefit. Then there's need to integrate EV charging into public terminals and corridors. What are we saying? There are two major terminals and hubs that Lamata is constructing now, the one at Mile 2 and the one at Marina. Apart from those two, all the other hubs and terminals, which are not even controlled by the state, also should be integrated into this EV project. Then the state should support charging at bus terminals and interchanges. That is, we have a bus stop down there before the secretariat. There can be a charging system there insofar as that there is space to accommodate such. Limited technical capacity, which I had mentioned earlier. There's need to embed EV skills development within the transport policy, and the Honorable Commissioner, took note of that before we came around here this morning. There's need to pilot first approach to allow learning before scaling. We do pilot schemes in phases before we scale up. And need for technical partnership with especially, other clients that have really done much in EV infrastructure provision. And there's need for maintenance contracts, for this charging infrastructure as major investments. You can see how to close the policy and capacity gaps from, the slide there. Our grids should be working. Our grids need to be, supplying electricity for this EV charging. And at the same time, we should be able to have capacity for solar charging. And in case the grid fails, then we have solar hybrid charging. The PPP arrangement and concessional finance, because the government cannot do it alone. It's a joint venture. And we move to the formalization of, informal transport operators. Then there's need for standardized approvals and policy certainty. I'm happy the man from Standard Organization of Nigeria said by, later this year, They will come up with standards for electric vehicle implementation in Nigeria. Then the use of public terminals, charging, outer corridors, which I had said that those infrastructure should be, made to provide charging infrastructure, and the need for capacity development of those who would run this project. The road ahead, that is next steps. 1, scaling up of electric bus deployment rather. We want to move beyond the current pilot phase into full operations, across the state. 2, the completion of the CNG filling stations. I said some had been constructed. We are looking at having 17 before the end of the year 2026. Then the implementation of the alternative fuel vehicle policy, then having a technical workforce that can be reliable to service that sector. Then integration of EV charging in as many places as possible, terminals, hubs, corridors, bus stops, and even having the private people have the shopping malls, the supermarkets and areas where we have space that can have EV charging. Then the need for formalization and funding of that sector. And when we do all this, we can say that to an extent, we've done our best. Lagos is not waiting. The transition is already underway across rail, road, and water. The strategy is clear. The partnership are in place. The infrastructure is growing. What Lagos does today sets the standard for the rest of Nigeria tomorrow. Thank you very much.